And I think that in the first class we covered just to recap, we covered the three aspects of like right view, right? So the four truths, right, of like suffering, non-self, and also we had touched on cause and effect. And today we'll actually go further into cause and effect, starting with an overview, which okay, cause and effect is a whole mouthful, so I'll just call it karma moving forward. Then we'll dive into actually further into motivations and intentions. Basically, sama sankappa, the second factor of the Eightfold Path, which Ajahn Brahm has actually once commented that this is the heart of the Eightfold Path, right? And the reason why it's called he said it's the heart of the Eightfold Path is because if you look at the Eightfold Path, right, it is actually only the right intentions that you are creating the karma. And then when you're creating the karma, that has got, by body, speech, and mind, that has got the effects that actually lead to the progression on the path or non-progression on the path. Yeah, so it has an effect on our lives, both like in the present and also actually in the future, because our motivation and intentions color our karma. And so today's session actually serves as a bridge between the first session on right view, and actually the last section, right, the following week will actually cover actions by body, speech, and mind. So this is actually like an intermediate bridge, and arguably it's also I would say it's probably the most important one. So you don't have to have right view perfected, right, before you actually start to cultivate and develop the right motivations and intentions, and you start actually taking actions by body, speech, and mind, which then actually helps you to progress on the Eightfold Path. I think that the session today will also hopefully address the questions that, whoops, sorry, a poster of my mind just dropped in the room. Like it's really everything that can break down today is like breaking down. And yeah, so I think that the session today hopefully addresses some of the questions that were raised by somebody in the class, right, who asked questions about fate and whether life is predestined. And I thought actually that it would be useful to go into this quote, right, from this sutta called A Lump of Salt, right? And it actually starts off with the Buddha telling the monk saying that if you say that, no matter how this person performs a deed, they experience it in the same way, meaning that actually everything is like predestined, right? It's like all fixed in a blueprint that you cannot change. No matter what you do, right? Then actually the Buddha is saying that there's no point to like living the spiritual life. You cannot live the spiritual life, and there'll be no chance to actually make a complete end to suffering. But precisely because there's no such thing as like destiny and predestination, there's nothing fixed in a firm blueprint. But there is this thing called cause and effect, right? When this person does this act of karma, they'll experience the fruit. And it's precisely because of this, right? That is actually the reason why you can actually live the spiritual life. You can actually walk the Eightfold Path, and how you can then actually make this chance of making a complete end to suffering. And on this point about complete end of suffering, maybe just to digress a bit on like this story that I heard, I think about a few months back. So there was actually this retreat that was done over Zoom involving the nuns from Dhammasara Nunnery. And one of the nuns was sharing that when she was a layperson, she had gone to this Burmese retreat, Pa Auk Sayadaw tradition. And apparently the Pa Auk Sayadaw tradition, there's like a interview that you have with the Sayadaw leading the retreat. So she was like sitting outside waiting for her turn in the retreat. And she saw everybody go in. Then she was like, okay, everyone's like all bowing. And she's a Western lady. So she was like, there's no way I'm going to bow to like this like random Burmese like guy, right? So she's like, okay, not gonna do that. And then as she was waiting for her turn, what she was thinking in her mind was, you know, are there enlightened beings out there, right? And then the second question that went through her head was, can I actually be fully enlightened? So those are the two things that she thought in her head, right? And then it came to her turn, and she went into the room, and she said that the Sayadaw was like just glowing. So she just went in and she just immediately just bowed down, right? And she just went immediately bowed down, and apparently the Payot Sayadaw you format, right, in the retreats you have to give a report in a certain format. So the translator, right, the Sayadaw doesn't speak any English. The translator was telling her like, oh, give your report. And she was just like, just so bowed over. She's like, okay, I'm still down there. And translators are a bit like losing patience. When the translator was interrupted by the Sayadaw in Burmese, and the translator apparently was like a bit confused. And then he repeated back, speaking to the Sayadaw, asking a question. Then the Sayadaw like much more firmly repeated back to the translator. Then the translator turned to this lady and said, "There are, it is, and don't give up." It's actually answering her questions. There are enlightened beings. Don't give up. You can be. Don't give up. Yeah. So as a result of that, she was just so inspired, right? Because you have this guy who basically read her mind, like from the other room, like in a different language, some more. Yeah. So I think that the this it can be a bit scary to realize that okay, actually nothing is like predestined, right? There's no like blueprint for you per se, but I would say that this teaching by the Buddha that you can actually like live, karma. You can actually plant the seeds, right? And actually you can make this complete end to suffering. That is actually the inspiration. Yeah. So I hope that this answers the question actually. And I think the other point to also add here is that if this was not true, right, then it's not possible for somebody like Angulimala to have done all this bad karma of like being a mass murderer, but ultimately still becoming a fully enlightened being. Yeah, so it's precisely because that you can actually plant the right motivations and plant the right karma that you can actually have this end of suffering. So let's cover the first overview of karma, right? And this is actually from the Samyutta Nikaya, the linked discourses, and it's called the Cessation of Karma. And the Buddha is saying that what actually exactly is like old karma, and he talks about actually the body, the parts of the senses, right? The eye is old karma, the ear, the mind, everything like the five sense organs, right? The six sense bases are actually old karma. And then what is new karma? It's whatever action that you take now, right, by body, speech, and mind, that's actually like new karma. And the cessation actually is when you are liberated with the cessation of this karma by body, speech, and mind. And the way leading to this cessation, right, is actually the Eightfold Path, right? All the way from like right view, all the way to Sama Samadhi. So I think the important point here to note is that whatever you have now is actually the result of your past karma. But then whatever you do now, right, actually is planting the seeds for future karma. And that has that very direct bearing to your future. And I would actually say that this is actually the most important thing for all of us to be mindful of wherever we are, whether is it we're with our loved ones at home or with friends or also even at work as well. Everything you do, right, in this current body, with your body, speech, and mind, you're actually planting the seeds of karma, which is why it's actually very important to be mindful of like how you're acting. But besides generating like, your future new sixth sense base, right? What else, how else does this karma have an impact on your future? And the next sutta on karma or karma is actually the most translated sutta. So this is the sutta that actually has the largest number of parallels, right? And I think that the reason why it's the largest number of parallels, right, is because it actually tells you the karma for getting things that are desired and wished for, things like how to be wealthy, how to have good looks. So all the very hiao people, just pay attention. This is how to really look good, right? And it's not to go for plastic surgery. Yeah, so it's called the sorry, I was sorry. It's called the shorter exposition of action. Sorry, I was thinking of the Pali name, so there's a bit of a confusion on my mind. So Master Gautama, this is actually a question from somebody who is not a disciple of the Buddha, hence like Master Gautama. Like, what is the cause and condition why human beings are seen to be inferior and superior Some people are short-lived and long-lived, sickly and healthy, ugly and beautiful, uninfluential and influential, poor and wealthy, low-born, high-born, stupid and wise. And then the Buddha then replies that actually beings are the owners of their actions, we're the heirs of our karma. They originate from karma, they're bound to karma, they have the karma as their refuge. And it's actually karma that actually distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. So what exactly is this karma? And this is the way that leads to a short life. Basically, when you kill living beings and you are bloody-handed murderers and so on and so forth. And then the way to a long life is the exact reverse, where you abstain from killing living beings, with rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, one abides compassionate to living beings. Then the way leading to sickliness, like poor health, is actually that you injure beings with your hand, right? You use a stick and so on and so forth, right? And you're injuring beings. And the way that leads to good health, right, is to not injure beings with a hand, with a club, with a stick, or with a knife. The way leading to ugliness, which I think is interesting, is that you are of an angry and irritable character and you display anger, hate, and bitterness. And the way to be beautiful is to not have the angry and irritable character, to not display anger, hatred, and bitterness. I'll just pause here just to say that if you were to think of the most beautiful person in your mind, right, or if you have a romantic partner, you'll be familiar with the fact that when you have the most beautiful person, it can be Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, and if they're angry, they look so ugly. Like anybody who actually has got anger, right? Your face is just got this very. It just looks very. It's a huge turn off. Yeah. So I think this is actually quite intuitive, like if you think about it in that way. And if you just repeatedly do that, then it actually seeps into your muscle memory, for lack of a better term. Yeah. Moving on. So this is actually relevant for those who want to be influencer as a career, right? The way to be uninfluential is to be envious of others, right? Towards those, the gains like honor, respect, reverence, salutation, and veneration received by others. And then if you want to be influential, then you should not be envious. And actually, maybe to add here that frequently in the Brahma Viharas, the opposite of envy is actually that of like mudita, right? Sympathetic joy, that you're truly happy that somebody else is enjoying the goodness that is deserving of them, right? So these are actually like some of the effects, right? So, and some of the causes, right? If you want a long life, then you actually don't kill things. You want to be healthy, you don't injure things. You want to be good looking, then you mitigate that with not being angry and irritable. So apply a lot of like metta. If you want to be influential, then you have a lot of like mudita, a lot of sympathetic joy, and don't be envious of others. To be rich, right? To be poor, right? Actually, it's because that you're not giving all the requisites of like food, drink, blah 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 to all these requisites and Brahmins. The way to wealth is to actually give generously to all these requisites and Brahmins. Um, and the way to leading to low birth, bearing in mind that the Buddha was actually in ancient India, that is that caste system that still exists to this day. Part of this is due to the fact that somebody is obstinate and arrogant and doesn't respect those who should be respected, right? And then if you have a high birth, that actually is due to the fact that you're not obstinate and not arrogant. You've got the humility. You actually respect and venerate those who should be venerated. And the last one is actually the interesting one in my mind of the way leading to stupidity is that you don't visit Rakus and Brahmin and ask questions. So you don't ask questions, right? And that actually is the way leading the karma for like stupidity. And the way for wisdom, in contrast, is that you actually visit all these like knowledgeable people and you ask questions. And so maybe it is good for us to. I think that this sutta is relatively like self-explanatory, and it covers a lot of like a career advice. So part of me thinks that we can just end this class like right here, but we won't. And maybe we'll just pause here to see that is there any particular questions that anybody might have before we move on, bearing in mind that this is your one chance to cultivate wisdom. Joking, plenty of time. No questions? Okay. So you'll have your chance for cultivating wisdom later. I think that the related to this entire sutta, right, MN 135, where it's all about like the karma and the effects of this karma. There's another sutta, and this one actually is a little bit suspect because there is actually no Chinese parallel. So most of the suttas I share, right, there is both a Pali and actually a parallel to the Pali, in the Chinese frequently. But in this next sutta that counts, there actually isn't one. So, but it seems broadly correct. So that's why I actually I'm sharing this.
I have a question.
Yes.
This can you go to the next the previous slide? Yeah, it seems that this got a lot to do with the deeds, which is the actions. But as you know, thoughts also have energy, and it leads to the imprint and also the karma. So how do you then see that?
Yeah. So actually the thing about karma, right, is to bear in mind that it is not just actually action by body and speech, but also by mind. Right. So but you see, for example, right, if you look at the first example of like killing living beings, if you look at the Vinaya, one of the key underlying principles of like karma is that you actually have the intention. So there's a very big difference in the karma, right, of like somebody killing something. They exercise a lot of diligence to like not be negligent, but then an accident just happens out of the blue, completely out of control. That kind of karma is very different from somebody who, I'm plotting to kill this person. I put in place a plan to kill this person, and then I executed this plan to kill this person, and I did that. Yeah. So the mental actions, right? There is actually a spectrum, and but let's put it this way: if you just have that single thought, right, of like, oh, I just want to kill this person because that person had cut my lane or whatever it is, extreme example. I would say that if you actually have such a thought, you probably and if it repeats like quite frequently, you might want to go and like get some help, right? That's the first thing. But I would say that that degree of karma is not the same thing as if you had actually like physically implemented it. Yeah, where the implications are far, far worse. Yeah. So this is something that there is a degree of a spectrum. On this whole point of thoughts and motivations, we'll actually be covering a fair bit of that in the last sutta for this session. So we can actually talk a little bit about that. But I hope that helps to explain a little bit about the consequences of like the effects in the spectrum of the consequences. Yeah.
Brother PJ, sorry, I have a question too. If let's say
Yes.
we had to queue for work, then and probably like we don't have a choice. I've already left the workplace, but the harm has been done. Like a lot of beings have been, mice, rats have been killed because of my job. So
yeah.
Is there any way, or what should I do? Because it wasn't a true intention of mine. It was purely because of work.
Yeah.
Would that be my would that result in a bad effect then?
The short answer would be that okay, the short answer would be actually that we can cover more later on, and I will be covering more later on how do you actually approach a situation like yours, right? Like how do you deal with like bad karma? Because the karma is already done already. Then what can you do about it, right? And I would actually say also that there's actually another. This is not a Sutta story, but it's a story of that Ajahn Brahm shared from his days with Ajahn Chah, right? And he said that one of Ajahn Chah's disciples, lay disciples, came to him and said that, I am a fisherman. I have to fish to actually feed my family, but I have to kill as a result to actually feed my family. And this karma like a bad karma? And Ajahn Chah actually said to him that yes, it's bad you have to kill, but then over time, right, what Ajahn Chah actually did was that he taught this man the ways of like herbal medicine, because as a forest monk, apparently in the old forest tradition in Thailand, you learn a lot about like, all the different plants and like herbs and medicines and stuff like that, right? That can actually cure people. So over time, Ajahn Chah actually like taught this man a lot, and he became actually a herbal doctor, and he was able to then give up actually his livelihood as a fisherman to kill in the name of the work. So I think that it's a bit of like the two things where if you can, ideally you should actually like probably like change the job, or if you can't change your job per se, at least to actually do so in a way that tries to minimize like suffering as much as you can, but ideally to actually like change the position. And then actually later on we'll talk about like how do you deal with like negative karma and then to do more of that. Yeah, does that help to answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Any other questions?
Just curious, so based on what you just said, in that story, is it similar to like if you have the salt in the jar and then you just dilute your salt with more, water?
Yeah. Yeah, you steal my story already.
Or is it? Oh, sorry.
It's okay, I'm just
So
teasing
it's
you.
to dilute it. I mean, you still have the karma effect,
Salt still there.
but you
Yeah,
would have
correct.
do more things to really
Yeah.
dilute it.
Yeah, I will cover that because actually that similarly came straight from the Buddha. This is something that actually is both in the Chinese and the Pali. So we can cover that in more detail later on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so actually this was the other sutta that talks about actually the consequences of bad karma, right? Killing, short lifespan already mentioned. Stealing leads to loss of wealth. Sexual misconduct leads to rivalry and enmity. Lying leads to false accusations. Divisive speech actually leads to you being divided against friends. Harsh speech leads to hearing disagreeable things. Talking nonsense means that leads to people not taking you seriously. And drinking alcohol leads to madness, right? So I think this one, I would say that again, this is quite self-explanatory. Like it's almost like a clear like a causal linkage. But this one I would be a little bit more cautious of because there's actually no parallel in the Chinese. Yeah. So we have spoken about
Sorry,
before I go into
when you say
yes.
parallel, right, do you mean translations?
Parallel translations. So maybe just to pause here a bit to explain, right? The transmission of the suttas actually happened over like different years, but the transmission from India to Sri Lanka was by King Ashoka, where he sent a son, right? The transmission that went to the northern countries, right, to China, then later to Japan and Korea, and also to Tibet eventually, they actually happened about like 700 to almost 1,000 years later from India directly to those countries. And when they were transmitted to China, the translations of the sutras actually came from multiple different sects that it's not Theravada, but they're actually like the Shravastivadins, the Dharmaguptakas, and so on and so forth, right? So every parallel actually is from a different sect. And like I mentioned, this happened like about like 700 to about 1,000 years after the Pali canon was actually transmitted to Sri Lanka. And it is also a mistake that people make that, oh, actually Pali Canon, that's actually the original translation, because what's happening now is that it's only in the last 20 to 30 years that we have been able to take the Chinese agamas, the parallels, right, from the different sects that happened like 700 to 1,000 years, and then actually compare that directly with the Pali. And it's this recent thing that they have discovered that actually a lot of the parallels is quite uncanny. When you read, especially in the Chinese, right, it's almost like word for word the same in terms of the meaning compared to the Pali, actually. Yeah, even though they have been separated by thousands of kms and like almost like 1,000 years, the meaning is still exactly the same. So in my mind, actually, they have a higher chance and likelihood that actually that they are close to like what the Buddha actually taught. Especially since you consider that they are from like different groupings, right, that believe the slightly different things of the Buddha's teachings. So these translations have only recently been made into English, which then allowed people to like do this comparison. Yeah, you also have people like Venerable Analayo, who a German monk who did his PhD on the Satipatthana Sutta in Pali, and looked up all the Sanskrit stuff, and then he was like, okay, the next best alternative parallels are in Chinese, and then he went to go and learn Chinese to actually learn to translate the whole thing and then do the comparison. Yeah, so he actually translated the entire Madhyama Agama and then actually did the comparison with the Majjhima Nikaya by himself, actually. Yeah, so that's only happened in the last like 20, 30 years that this has become available for people. Yeah. So that's actually what I mean by the parallels. These are actually in the Tripitaka, in the Chinese Mahayana tradition, they are known as the Ahansing, the Agamas, and they are widely recognized to be the parallels to the Pali Canon. But they are part of the same body of entire suttas that the Mahayanas actually like believe in. It's just that they have additional things like the Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita suttas, and all that stuff. Yeah. But this is actually where there's a very clear overlap with the Pali Canon. Yeah. Ken? Okay, so going back to like what we mentioned about like karma, I think it's important to also talk about actually the relationship between karma, intention, motivation, and choice. I would actually say that there is almost no difference, right, between all of these things. And this particular text, again, there's a parallel. I think it's actually quite instructive. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya, where they organize it by numbers, right? The Anguttara sixes. And you can see here from the text here is intention that I call deeds, Chetanaham Vikave Kamam Vadami. And the word Chetana, right, is actually what is frequently used in the text, right, to actually convey not just intention, but also actually that of like will. And actually, it's also used to convey actually the volitional formation aggregates frequently in the 5 aggregates. So this whole idea of like your willpower, your intention, um, you know, your volitional formations, right? All these things are actually like all intimately linked, given the choice of the word like chetana, actually. Yeah, and so actually coming back to this, like it is intention that I call deeds. For after making a choice, one actually acts by body, speech, and mind. So you can see that with this short excerpt, right, you can see that intention, right, that making that will, making that choice, actually that is actually, even if you decide, for example, that you want to meditate, that actually is an exercise of like willpower. Yeah, and it is maybe useful here to talk about why is it that the worst piece of meditation advice I always hear is, oh, when your mind wanders off, just gently bring it back to whatever you're looking at, which totally makes no sense whatsoever. Because if you think about it, the nature of thinking, right, is actually a disturbance that's caused, right, because you actually frequently want to be somewhere else other than where you are. There's that intention to like, oh, want to like go away, intention to like do something. Like that's the disturbance that actually drives a lot of your thinking. It's creating the ripples on the surface of the water. And then when you are saying to gently bring your mind back to your object, right? You're effectively using your hand to try to smoothen out the ripples of the surface of your mind, and you're creating like even more waves. The nature of thinking and the chetana, the will, is so interlinked and intertied, right? That just saying that you choose to let your mind come back to this thing is actually that willpower that seeds even more thinking and more disturbance. So that's the reason why, right, it does not work at all. When you actually are distracted when you're meditating, the worst thing to do is to tell yourself, let me watch my breath again. Let me watch whatever it is I'm watching. instead, the best thing you can do, right, is to actually calm the water down. Just relax your entire body. If you are, one trick that I learned from Ajahn Brahm is that if your mind is being very agitated, then focus on something that's slightly coarser, easier to pay attention to, something like your body sensations, and to use that to relax your body. And very naturally, you're using your body and your mind's connection, right, to actually calm the waves down naturally by themselves. That's actually the way to approach it. Yeah, because you're not actually choosing to like exercise you're not using the same parts of your mind. You're actually like just calming your body, and by focusing on something to like calm it down, you are relaxing, and you're relaxing actually the foundation that actually calms everything down, the whole mind down as a result. Yeah. So anyway, coming back to this, like making a choice is actually making karma in that sense, right? And the term choice, right, in the Sanskrit and the Pali, right, they frequently use this other term that also means karma. It's almost synonymous with karma frequently, and that's like sankara, right? So in this particular case, like this is actually said by Sariputta, right? He talks about, he goes into a very detailed explanation of that right view in this particular sutta, which I strongly encourage. And he explains dependent origination as well. And he talks about actually choices, like sankara, like karma in this case. The origin, cessation, and practice that leads to cessation. There are three kinds of choices, like by body, speech, and mind. And they originate actually from like delusion or ignorance. So when you actually are able to see things correctly, right, that's when you actually remove, actually, you no longer actually will make the choices that actually make new karma and effects of new karma moving forward. And the way to actually lead to this cessation of karma, right, is actually just this Eightfold Path. Yeah, that's something that is a recurring theme throughout the whole of the Pali Canon. So you can see that all to choose, to intend, to decide, to want, right? All these are actually forms of karma. Right. When you actually act with it, when you actually say something, that's when it translates from like your mind to your body and your speech. But just even that intentionality in your mind, that's already like some kind of a karma that's like being created. So then, right, coming back to like, okay, so we are supposed to be on the Eightfold Path, we're supposed to like incline towards cessation, right? So then can you choose to cease? Right. And this is where you have to be very careful, because this choosing to cease, right, actually is it can lead to like a wanting to not exist, which is exactly going back to the first class, right? This craving for extermination, which is actually then a fuel for more karma moving forward. And I was just watching a Netflix series with my wife. It's this Korean show called Tomorrow. It's about suicide. And this is actually the single most important reason why in the Buddhist context, suicide makes no sense whatsoever. Because when you actually commit suicide, but you haven't extinguished actually the underlying causes for future existence, it's like trying to, it's like, how to say, you're stamping out a fire, right? And then actually you have actually lit another fire, and you actually are stamping out this fire at the same time, and the fire will carry on somewhere else. Yeah, so this is actually the part where you have to be very, very careful to like not want to not exist in that sense, because that's actually kind of like a new karma to begin with. And I think that the other danger of this wanting to not exist, right, is that it leads to very warped interpretations of like what the Buddha actually taught. And I think that people want to get rid of karma so badly that increasingly in the Buddhist circles, you hear of people saying things like, "Oh, you just burn your bad karma," right? Which I actually heard in a Vipassana retreat once. And I was like, actually, that's not what the Buddha actually taught, right? And I think that the Buddha himself actually directly critiqued this, right, with this sutta, right, the shorter discourse on the mass of suffering. So he talked about this time that he was staying near Rajagaha, and he saw all these like Jains that suffer, they are making themselves like torturing their bodies. So he came out and then he asked these like Jain ascetics, like, why are you constantly like, basically torturing yourself so that you suffer those like painful feelings? And the Jains said that, our teacher, Nataputta, claims to be all-knowing, all-seeing, to know everything without exception, that knowledge and vision are constantly and continually present in me while walking, standing, sleeping, and waking. And then you have done bad deeds in your past life. You wear them away with these, all these like ascetic practices. And then when you refrain from such deeds in the present by body, speech, and mind, you're not doing any bad deeds in the future. So by eliminating your past bad karma and not doing any new karma, that's how like this suffering comes to an end. And so then the Buddha asked them, but do you know for sure that you existed in the past and it is not the case that you didn't exist? Then they said they don't know. Then do you know for sure that you did these bad deeds in the past? And they said, no, we don't know. And do you know that you did such and such bad deeds? No, I don't know. Do you know how much suffering has been worn away? I also don't know, right? and then the Buddha also asked, like, then do you know about like giving up the unskillful, unwholesome qualities in the present life and embracing the skillful qualities? And they say they don't know. Then the Buddha, actually, in a very cheeky way, said that, okay, so then those who are like murderers and like people who torture other people and live cruelly, right? Then they will actually be reborn as Jains, because you're suffering so much. It must be that you're doing so bad karma in the past, right? That's why you're suffering so much as a Jain ascetic. Yeah. So this is what the Buddha actually said in the sutta. And you can see it from this, right, that the Buddha is very, very, very bluntly saying that this belief that, oh, you sit and suffer, it's just bodily pain, just sit and watch it and just let it go. You will just like burn away the bad karma. But by just being neutral in your feelings towards like the unpleasant feelings that you are like burning away the bad karma, this completely wrong view. And it's completely not the way to go about this. Yeah, and the danger, I think, is that when people want so much to like cease suffering, it becomes very attractive to like do this kind of like nonsense thing. But actually, this is not the way to go. Yeah. So instead, right, how do you then like get rid of like your bad karma? And like, it's like what Sister Ting Ting said as a preview, right? And this is the lump of salt simile from the same sutta that I covered, right? And it's not even like a large container that the Buddha gave as a simile. He said, okay, you drop a small lump of like salt into a small bowl of water, it becomes very salty, you can't drink it. And then you take the same lump of salt and you drop it into the Ganges River, which any of you have been on pilgrimage will know it's a huge ass river, right? It's not small at all, right? And the point is that you have the same lump of like bad karma, right? And then when you actually have got so much good that you're doing, with all the good karma generated from like whatever it is that you are doing, right, in your life, right, that becomes the Ganges River, and that actually is what dilutes actually the bad karma. So I think this is actually the important part. It's actually not just about avoiding. It's actually really about like just focusing on like generating that good karma, right? And you dilute the bad karma. You never really get rid of it, but you actually kind of like dilute it. And I will also add here that there are certain classes of bad karma that are very, very damaging. Things like, for example, murdering our parents. The karma of that, right, is so extreme that actually you cannot ordain as a monk or a nun if you actually do that, right? And I think that Mahamoggallana, the Buddha's chief disciple with the super magic powers, part of the reason why is it that he died the very bloody death was because that in the past karma that he did, right, one of them was extremely atrocious. I can't remember the exact detail of that, but that actually caused and took fruit, no matter how much good that he did in this point in time, and it had to bear fruit, yeah, basically. So that actually led directly to his passing away. Yeah, so I think that coming back to like what makes good karma, I think it's maybe important here to kind of like talk about what makes good karma is not good intentions. Yeah. And this is going to be quite contentious because like we think about it, it's like, oh, but if I do things with the best of intentions, then it should be like fine, right? No, that's actually not exactly what the Buddha actually said. What makes good karma is actually right motivations and right intentions. Yeah, it's not the same as like good intentions, right? So this whole idea, for example, of like telling white lies is a very, very slippery slope, right? Very, very slippery. But let's just talk about like actually what are these like right motivations. So this is actually directly a translation by Ajahn Brahm himself, right? He talks about like what are unwholesome motivations. They are motivations of desire for the world of the five senses, of aversion, which is the same as ill will, right? And of cruelty. From what do these unwholesome motivations originate? They arise from perceptions of desire for the world of the five senses, of aversion, and of cruelty. Then where do these unwholesome motivations cease without remainder? They cease in the first jhana. Then what are the wholesome motivations? They are motivations of renunciation, kindness, and gentleness. Where do they arise from? They arise from the perceptions of renunciation, kindness, and gentleness. Where do they cease? They cease in the second jhana. And maybe I'll just pause here just to reflect on a few points. Right. The first thing to highlight, right, is that this, in my mind, completely articulates the difference between like good motivations and like right motivations, right? You have got good motivations, or I'll just help the person now, right? Or maybe I have to give a very like blunt example, right? In a lot of like Buddhist societies, like you hear of all this infighting, right? And have you started to ask yourself, like, hey, why is it that in these Buddhist societies, right, everyone's supposed to learn the Dharma, everyone's supposed to practice the Dharma? How come got all this infighting, right? How is it that there's like this ill will, all this clashing that's like coming about? And it is simply because of that first point here, that they are motivated by desire of the world of five senses. Because no matter how wholesome it is, right, when you're actually in a monastery trying to like do something, or in the society trying to do something, that something you're doing is actually in the realm of the five sense world. It is not, you're not sitting there like trying to get into the jhanas by like letting go altogether. Right? Your motivations are a very different direction. Your motivations actually upwards to try to convince everybody else, to try to like say, let's do this thing for the greater good, and so on and so forth. And that motivation, I would argue, is not right motivation. Yeah. And then frequently then it's like, okay, I got this view, like I want to do this thing, but no, this person disagrees. Why is that person so stupid? You got aversion. Then you got all the cruelty that comes out, and then you got, and it's really a big tragedy to see this, because then you've got people who have got very, they might have actually like the best of intentions, but then the way that it's done, right, they have actually turned that potentially wholesome karma into completely like unwholesome karma as a result of this. Yeah, and this is actually a real tragedy. But I think that the important thing here is to recognize that there is this difference, right? And so then when you're in such a position, whether is it in a Buddhist society or at work or whatever it is, right? You need to ask yourself, like, am I grasping or am I letting go? Am I, like saying like, oh, this person is a stupid, and trying to critique and like, find fault with them? Or am I being kind to them, giving them the benefit of the doubt? Am I cruel or am I like gentle? These are the things to actually bear in mind, to ask yourself, what are your motivations? And that actually is what makes good, the right good karma in that sense. Yeah. So the key thing here is really like, are you grasping and letting go? Right. That in my mind is actually the biggest thing. The motivations of renunciation, kindness, and gentleness, Ajahn Brahm has reformulated it for the BSWA, right, as like make peace, be kind, be gentle. Right. And it's actually exactly a very good translation and a very easy way to remember this. And the second point I want to highlight is actually this point about renunciation, right? It sounds hard. It sounds like, okay, what exactly is like this word? And if you recall, actually, the first sutta by the Buddha, right, where he talked about this cessation of like suffering, right, the third noble truth of cessation of suffering, and the four ways of letting go that Ajahn Brahm spoke about, right? You have the generosity, chaga, patinisaga, muti, and alayo. these are actually the 4 different ways, right, of like renunciation actually. Yeah. So going back to this point about renunciation, is really about this different ways of like letting go. Like how do you, when you think about like making peace, right? You're actually, how you make peace is that you're letting go of like that desire to want to do something else. You're just like, okay, sure, I'll just be generous to this. I'll just like let it pass. I'll just like be free or not let it stick. Right. Yeah. So I think that this is just one important point to talk about uh, the difference between like right motivations versus like good motivations. Oh, sorry, right motivations and good motivations, correct. Yeah. So I think maybe one point to also add here is that the context is everything, right? So if you are at a job where your whole family depends on you to like bring back the salary and all that stuff, right? And then you are asked by your boss like, oh, why are you not hitting your sales targets? I don't think that it would actually fly for you to tell your boss, oh, my teacher says like make peace, be kind, be gentle. It's fine. Just let go of the desire for like holding on to like these sales targets. I don't think that's gonna fly, right? In the words of this other monk who used to be a stockbroker, he said that sales revenues don't happen by themselves, right? There's actually so I think it's all about context. But I think that minimally, right, in our practice, minimally when we sit and we meditate, right, and when we are just faced with nothing else from the five senses world, we close our eyes, we're just faced with our own mind. Minimally at that moment, right, that we actually just bear this in mind, that it is not about like wanting something else. It is about actually just making peace, being kind, being gentle. And if you just keep doing this, right, when you're meditating, you're planting unbelievably good seeds of good meditation karma for yourself. Okay, so I think the other point here is that how do you cultivate this, right? So you should cultivate this by focusing on your perceptions of actually what are things that are like making peace, being kind, and being gentle, all right? So cat videos actually have something useful, right? If they make you feel that, oh, this is like so cute, this is so nice, watch more cat videos on the internet. Okay. Now we'll cover the last sutta for tonight. This is perhaps my favorite sutta, and it's called The Two Kinds of Thought. And the Buddha was saying that before his awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening, I thought, why don't I meditate by dividing my thoughts into 2 classes? So I assigned sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts to one class, and I assigned thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness to the second class. Notice the language: renunciation, goodwill, or harmlessness. Right. This is actually about the motivations, about the intention that you have. So it's like, okay, I do these things in mind, like which is like, the good and not so good. All right. Then as I meditated, diligent, keen, and resolute, a sensual thought, a malicious thought, a cruel thought arose. And I understood, right, that this sensual thought or malicious thought or cruel thought has arisen in me. It leads to me hurting myself, it hurts others, and it hurts both. It blocks wisdom. It's on the side of anguish. It doesn't lead to actually like nibbana. When I reflected on this, it went away. When I reflected that it leads to hurting both, it went away. When I reflected that it blocks wisdom, knowing the danger of all this, that it went away. So then that is actually what allowed him to give up, and eliminate all these like central thoughts that arose. And this is the next paragraph that I really love. It's like, whatever a person frequently thinks about and considers, that becomes your heart's inclination. And when they often think about and consider sensual thoughts, they've given up the thought of renunciation to cultivate the sensual thought. Their mind inclines towards sensual thoughts. It's the same thing for malicious thoughts, it's the same thing for cruel thoughts as well. And then this beautiful simile, right? Suppose it's the last month of the rainy season when the crops grow together and a cow herd must take care of the cattle. He would tap and poke them with his staff on the side and ensure that they don't, go into the crops and then start eating the crops. Why is that? Because under Indian law at that point in time, if they wander into the crops, he could be executed, imprisoned, fined, or condemned. In the same way, I saw that these unskillful qualities have the drawbacks of sordidness and corruption, and actually that the skillful qualities have the benefit and cleansing power of like renunciation. Then as I meditated, diligent, keen, ardent, and resolute, essential, sorry, I think this is a, oops, I think I might have pasted the wrong thing. This one, right, it's correct, sorry. Yeah, a thought of renunciation arose, a thought of goodwill arose, and harmlessness arose. And then I understood that these thoughts that arise in me, they don't lead to hurting myself or others or both. They nourish wisdom. The sight of freedom from anguish, they lead to extinguishment. If I were to keep on thinking and considering this all night and all day, there's no danger in that. Still, thinking and considering for too long will tire out my body. And when the body is tired, the mind is stressed. And when the mind is stressed, it's far from samadhi, or immersion. And so I still settled, unified, and immersed my mind internally. Why is that? So that my mind would not be stressed. Whatever a person thinks about and considers becomes their heart's inclination. So if you frequently consider and think about thoughts of renunciation, you give up sensual thoughts and cultivate the thoughts of renunciation. Similarly, for goodwill, it will overcome cruelty. For harmlessness, it will actually overcome the cruelty. And suppose it's the last month of summer when all the crops have been gathered within the village, and the cowherd must take care of the battle, or of the cattle. Or at the root of a tree or in the open field, he need only be mindful that the cattle are there. And in the same way, I needed only to be mindful that actually those wholesome things were there, and that's all he needed to do. Yeah. So I think that the key thing to highlight here is this whole passage right at the bottom of like, whatever your mind thinks about and inclines towards, right? That's actually what you actually would incline towards. And like considering also the earlier passage of like the perceptions of all this renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness, those are the very things that actually lead to more renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. So to focus on those things that actually spark that wholesome, like letting go, that chaga, that giving up, to focus on actually the metta, to focus on actually the gentleness that you have. Those are actually the things I would actually strongly recommend. And if you notice here also in this particular section, right? This entire section here that I'm highlighting, the Buddha didn't actually overcome these defilements by using willpower. He fully understood there's this danger, right? And then when he understood and reflected on the danger of that, that's actually what led these things to actually like disappear, right? So instead of applying like willpower, apply wisdom. Seek to understand the danger before you actually like do something, before you actually like inadvertently create like more bad karma. So that wraps up the last sutta for today, and then the last session will be more about actions for yourself and for others by body, speech, and mind. But maybe we'll just open it up for any final questions. Is it okay if we extend tonight by until like 9:10, given of the technical difficulties? Everyone's okay? Okay, cool. Thank you. Yes. Anybody? Any questions?
I just want to clarify right.
Yes.
Right motivation and the other one is a good motivation. Yeah. Do you have an example? Like, I'm just thinking because you used the example of a temple. So if let's say in a temple, you want to raise funds to build another retreat center, for example. So can you use that to help me understand what would be right motivation and what would be good motivation?
I think that would very clearly fall in the bucket of a good motivation.
Okay.
Yeah, for the simple fact that actually the if you ask yourself, like, okay, is there like what actually are the main motivations for doing so, right? I would say that it is a motivation that is very directed at the five sense world. It's not about internal. It's nothing to do with like actually that you're letting go of that inclination. You're like, sitting there trying to go into samadhi or anything like that. It's oh, let's go out into the world to like build something that we believe will be good, right? So that already very naturally in my mind, right, is actually this motivation of desire for the world of the five senses already. Yeah, so that's why it's like it's one of those things that it's like it's actually not super clear, right? It's not the same as actually like unequivocally, right? That if you give and there's that kindness and that gentleness, right? That it would be very pure. But because of this whole thing about the desire, for the world, the five senses, a lot of things in the five sense world, they tend to be a little bit less clear that actually the karma is necessarily a good karma in that sense. So that's why you have to be very careful. Yeah. I mean, undoubtedly there will be an element of like, renunciation here where, oh, actually we're giving, right? There's that generosity. That's actually very good. Right. But then what I'm trying to say is actually that frequently, why is it you see, you have got all these like motivations that start off with like the purity, right? But then as the project goes along, there is all this like, fights that happen. And the fights happen because people are actually clinging on to like what they're seeing, hearing, and it's all like linked to the world of the five senses. Yeah. It's not as though that they are like deciding what to do by saying that, okay, let's all meditate to go into the first jhana where you're completely away from the five senses. Then you come up, then we decide. It's not that. Frequently, actually, these discussions are happening in a context in a exco discussion. A lot of these people are not necessarily like very advanced practitioners, and so then the discussion tends to be, you said this and actually that's totally not true, and then you end up like fighting and recriminating. Yeah, so that's actually one example of like actually good motivations are not enough. Like you have to ask yourself, like, actually are your actions, right, actually good motivations or right motivations? No? Yeah, is it really about like making peace, being kind, being gentle ultimately? Yeah.
Sorry, Brother PJ, I have another
Yes.
question is, for example, like we want to dilute the karma and then we do a good thing, for example, like donating and all, but would that constitute as a not a pure intention because we want to dilute our karma, so we do a good deed? Because we want to do wholesome deeds with a good intention, but when we do this, then would that help, like in a way, because it's not entirely of a pure intention to help anymore?
Just to clarify my understanding, you're saying that you're doing it to dilute your bad karma, so you are giving,
Yep.
and then you are saying that because your intention is to dilute your bad karma, is that necessarily then like not so pure, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So like
Okay.
in a way, because there, I remember that when you all want to do good deeds at all, you should always be with a wholesome and a pure intention. But in a way, when we want to create like a proper cause and effect, right? Then you're wanting something, and then it's because you want to benefit from it. So it's no longer a pure and a wholesome intention in that way.
Yeah. So I think that's absolutely spot on. I think that the term for such motivations is that you are trading, right? You're hoping that I do this, and in exchange I'll get this.
Yeah.
So buy and sell. Yeah, and that kind of calculativeness, right, is actually what is self-defeating. So I think that you're actually far better off giving, right, because you want to be inspired. And maybe I'll share an example from the Vinaya. This is a example from the Pali Vinaya. so the foremost of the Buddha's lay disciples is female disciples, right? Lay disciples is this lady called Lady Visakha. And one of the things that she did, right, that created this thing called the bathing robes that the monks still use to this day. She gave these bathing robes because of this particular incident that I won't elaborate on. But then she went on to actually request of the Buddha in that particular rains season, right, the rains retreat, to say that for this vasa, can I actually provide the monks with, of the entire Sangha, all the requisites that any monk is that's doing the rains retreat with you needs, right? I'll just provide that. And the Buddha actually asked her, like, wow, this is actually a very big request. Like, why is it that you're asking to monopolize this, right? Um, and and then Lady Visakha's response was, I'm requesting this so that whenever I see any venerable one, that my heart will be gladdened that I have actually contributed to this, noble beings, like a path towards liberation. And that will be something that will actually benefit me spiritually. And then the Buddha actually said, sadhu, 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 and he gave the permission for that. Because she was actually trying to give, right, for the sake of actually like inspiring herself that I have done good. So I think there's a fine line between like saying that you are doing this to get the benefit of diluting your karma versus saying that you're giving, right, and like actually with the intention to inspire yourself, the fact that you're actually doing good. Yeah, so I would say maybe more inclined towards the latter. Like think of like Lady Visakha, that she was just giving it because she wanted to actually to be able to reflect and open up and gladden her own heart and say that I've actually done this amount of like good, I've participated in this like great karma of like helping this being be liberated. Yeah, and that inspiration is actually maybe a good guiding principle. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I saw, okay, hi Suan. Yes, thank you, bro, pasting. I saw that in the sutta it says that keep thinking of renunciation also leads to the mind getting tired. Having too much of something, even renunciation, is stressful. Is the middle way to have renunciation moderately? Yeah, so I think that the point here, right, is not to say that you should have renunciation too much or anything, but the point here was actually to say that the whole act of thinking these wholesome thoughts, there's no danger in them. But because you're thinking all the time, actually that tires out the mind. And the mind actually is strengthened when you have stillness. And I think if I were to share from a personal experience, right, that I have observed in myself that when I go on retreats, I actually am most rested when I have, not when I wake up. Ironically, I actually feel very tired when I wake up, but most actually when I have a very good meditation. Then when I come out of it, I'm just like, wow, it's such a relief. I'm like so awake and like so much energy. The mind is like so still, and then you get so much energy as a result of that. So that's actually the main thing to take away from this particular point, which is the reason why the Buddha spoke about actually like stilling the mind and going into samadhi. Yeah, and on the another question, wholesome motivation cease in second jhana. What should be the takeaway for this line, Sadhu? Okay, thank you for asking that question, because I actually did want to talk about this. The whole point here, right, is actually that okay, each of the four jhanas is accompanied by something disappearing. The first jhana, why is it that you've got the ecstatic bliss, right? It's because that's actually the first time that your sixth sense of the mind is completely separate from the five sense world. And that's the reason why this sutta, that first section, that all these unwholesome motivations, including all the desire for the world of the five senses, they cease, because actually that's the point when your five sense world completely disappears. Elsewhere in the Pali Canon, in the suttas, the Buddha actually talks about the first jhana as the end of the world as we know it, because it's the first time you actually see the mind for what it actually is, right? And you actually recognize that the five senses, right, are actually burdens and actually suffering, right? Then the second jhana, right, is actually when you have got will, right, completely disappearing. Any kind of like willpower is completely gone. That is actually the first time you have got perfect stillness. And the way that Ajahn Brahm describes, I've never been to the second jhana, so I can't really speak from personal experience. But the way that Ajahn Brahm explains it is that between the first jhana, you have got this excitement, right? And your mind is actually still like, he uses the term like a wobbly, right? But then when you actually have entered the second jhana, you still have that bliss and that happiness. But then what happens is that actually that willpower, right, that desire, that wanting, that karma is actually gone. Right? That motivation, the choice making, all that is actually all gone. And so then, right, even these wholesome motivations also disappear because you've got no will whatsoever. The third jhana, to just elaborate and complete the picture, third jhana is actually when you have got the separation between that pity, that joy, and even that very, very ecstatic rapture bliss, right, is actually disappearing. And you actually prefer the calmer happiness of like just that pleasure and happiness. And the fourth jhana is actually when even the happiness is actually too much of a disturbance, and you actually prefer actually just like equanimity. So every single jhana, actually something else is disappearing, and you're actually seeing that for the first time. Yeah. Does that help to answer your question, Sulan? Okay, cool. Most welcome. All right, it's 9:10. If there are no further questions, then we can probably stop.
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question? Yes, please go ahead.
Brother PJ.
Hey, Brother
evening.
Vikan. Hi.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. This is awesome. Okay, this is exactly what I love. All right. We might not have enough time, but it's okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
We can carry this. We can continue this in our own conversation. Two questions here, right? So, just to add on to what you've said, like Ajahn Brahm talks about how each jhana, like each higher jhana, is like in the previous jhana. Like
Yes.
you go into the first jhana to get to the second jhana. So
right.
that's the language that Ajahn Brahm uses. So two questions, right? Number one, with regard to Sulan's question, wholesome motivation cease in second jhana. Actually, this one is something I've struggled with as well, like in terms of my own study. Like I don't understand, like, does it mean like second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, there is no wholesome motivation? It sounds a bit strange to me. Okay, but that's my question, right? Number one. Number two, I mean, because to me it seems like jhana is renunciation, jhana is letting go, and renunciation is wholesome motivation. Okay. Anyway, so that's my first question. Second question is, so just now, like we talk about Sister Ting asked about good motivation, right motivation, and so on, and like the five senses is a huge theme, right? I'm just more thinking about like so many things we do surround the five senses, and of course, yeah, Ajahn Brahm, they would say, yeah, of course, this is not very wholesome, right? But like, let's say we are, for example, we are pursuing an ambition. Maybe we are trying to get a promotion and so on because we want to buy a bigger house. So those are all super unwholesome, or like, because those sounds quite normal and quite standard. Yeah, so those are the two questions.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions, Brother Ricken. I think I'll answer the second question first. I think you're absolutely spot on to say that those are very normal motivations. But I would actually say that normal motivations doesn't necessarily yield good karma, right? If you think about the world, right, actually an interpretation, one way to look at the term samsara is that actually it is the world. Yeah. So all these normal motivations, right? Frequently you have to ask yourself, where do these come from? Why is it good to get, this ambition? Why is it you must like get that larger house and like, all that stuff for your family? Right? Frequently, this have been planted to you by the wider world of samsara. Yeah. So the short answer I would say is that it really depends on the degree of the motivations when you're making that decision at that point in time. But I would suspect that a lot of all these, like anything to do with the five sense world, whether it's about your ambition, your desire, and all that stuff, frequently a lot of all these intentions have been planted on by somebody else, right? And they're not really yours to begin with, but they're really like the function of us like being in samsara. We're not renunciants, we're not in the Sangha, right? And so then we are actually very exposed to the workings and machinery of samsara. So we just have to be very careful and recognize a spade for what it is. That frequently, like a lot of our desires, right, our motivations, our behaviors in the wider normal world are not necessarily like right motivation. We're not making peace, we're not being kind, we're not being gentle. It's a striving, it's a I want to get this thing. And that in itself already, right, is actually that unwholesome motivation, because it's actually linked to the five sense world. Yeah. And related to this point is actually that when we're actually doing any work in the Dharma circles, yes, I mean, if everyone just stayed in jhana, right, no temple, no society, no charitable works will be done, right? So that's not the point. But I think that the point is actually that when you're actually doing these acts of service, right, to remind yourself of actually what really matters. And what really matters is that actually when you're doing this, right, go there with that chaga, go there with that generosity, with that metta, with that gentleness. You go into a fight with a fellow member of like what to do, and ask yourself, are you actually diluting your good karma with like more salt, right? That's actually the key thing here, right? What exactly are you doing? Like, and then if you're like holding on to like all your desires of, oh, it should be done in this way, not this other way, right? When you're getting to fights with like people in the Buddhist societies, then you'd ask yourself like, how much of this is actually like really like right motivation? Yeah, so that's actually the first question. Sorry, the second question, to answer your second question. To answer your first question, again, going back to this, right? It's a great question you're asking because like it's something I grappled with also. It's like, okay, like how exactly does it work? Like, does it mean that when you go to the jhana states, actually that you're not doing any good karma? And I think that the best explanation of that, right, is Ajahn Brahm, right, kind of like gave the comparison of the four jhanas, right, as like these four rooms in sequence, right, that have got a very slippery floor. And the only way you can go into any of these like rooms, right, you have to go through them in sequence, right? And so, right, you have to run, and then you run already, you let go, and then you actually like slide across the floor, and that brings you from like first, second, third jhana. But when you're actually sliding across the floor, right, when you're in the middle of the jhana, there's like no motivation and no like desire or move whatsoever. You can't do anything. You're just like a passenger until suddenly, the conditions are up, then you're like rebounded back. And the motivation that actually drives you, right, is actually the motivation of like letting go. So I hope that answers the question, like why is it that actually it might seem a bit counterintuitive, like why is it that in the second jhana that all motivation cease, right? But then actually, and jhanas actually like make very good, very, very powerful karma in that sense. But it is the ultimate of like letting go in many ways. Yeah, but you actually have got no will and like no control whatsoever. Yeah.
Wow, I mean this metaphor of slippery floor is just pretty cool. Like it's the first time I've heard of it, and it's just pretty cool. Yeah, I got to think about it.
Not me, it's
Yeah,
Ajahn Brahm.
thank you.
Ajahn Brahm. Yeah, welcome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ask one more question. I'm conscious we were already 17 minutes over.
Yes.
Can I ask one more? So just now you mentioned about, let's say if you're in the meeting with people, right? And then somehow we got misunderstood. And then somehow things doesn't go the way I hope it to be. And I start to stand up for myself. I say, no, this is what is supposed to be done, and this is what I say, but you misinterpreted what I say. It's very common in workplaces, right? So when I link this to what you mentioned, how do I strike the balance between standing up for myself versus I said, you say, they say? How do you do that?
Yeah, it is a question that is a good question that is actually very hard to answer, like definitively to say, oh, this is like the only way or not, right? the advice I would ask, right, is I would actually suggest would be, okay, there are a few things though. One is actually that if your main thing is just to explain yourself and to fend for yourself by actually just explaining where you are at, right? And actually, even after that, you can look back and say that, oh, actually, I got zero aversion and zero cruelty, and zero desire, then that's probably not a bad thing, right? The tricky part is actually that a lot of times, right, our motivations are not very clear until after the event happens, right? Things are so involved and so quick that you, before you know it, right, you're really like, oh, just like blurted out like, this like harsh word that pokes fun at somebody, right? That can be quite devastating as well. So I think that is actually the tricky part, though. Yeah. I would also say that the other judgment call, right, would really be the particular context that you're trying to explain it. Like given this world where increasingly we are increasingly in a very good way aware of the various biases, right? Like for example, gender bias. Like I've had all these very strange experiences that I experienced with my wife, right? Where my wife is doing the talking, and the guy is just answering me. I'm looking at him like, why are you talking to me? I don't understand why. And then my wife will continue talking to him, and then he will reply and reply to me. And it's this very strange thing where I'm like looking at my wife, and then my wife will continue. So it's like we're looking at each other all the time. It's like a very strange thing. And later on, I was like, this is so damn strange. It's happened more than once. And I was like telling my wife, this is so damn strange. She's like, it happens all the time. And she's like, it's all these guys who like believe actually that only a guy can like make a decision. And I was like, oh wow, I've never experienced it before. So I was like, oh, this is the first time it happened. So in such a context, right, I would actually say that speak up, right? You definitely do need to clarify yourself. If you're in that position where you're facing this, you do need to actually speak up for yourself and to make it be known that, hey, like I am actually deserving of that respect in that sense, right? But then I would say that the danger would arise, right, when you cling on to this after the event, when it then becomes like an aversion, it becomes like ill will. Yeah, so that's actually the fine balance. Is there's no like clear-cut answer, unfortunately, to your question, but ultimately it boils back down to, when you look back at it, right, did you feel that you were acting in the right motivations? Like, was it actually for any particular wrongful things though? Yeah.
Go back office and practice.
Sorry?
I go
What?
back office and practice.
Yeah, I would actually add here that one of the most powerful practices that I've ever encountered was to actually calmly play back whatever has been said. If you are able to do this in a very calm, collected way, it has a very powerful effect of like calming everybody down, and has a very powerful effect of actually like helping people like see, oh, actually this is actually like what's actually the reality. And sometimes, right, I will also add that sometimes the best thing to do, right, is to walk away from the situation. You might actually be better off like just taking a pause, let everybody cool down, then when you meet again to just recap everything. Yeah, so those are actually some of the more tactical techniques I would recommend. Yeah.
Tomorrow I go back office and try.
Okay, that's not how it goes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Mindful of time, sorry that I overran a bit, but yeah, thanks so much to everyone for joining me on this journey with the suttas. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.